Hello everyone, welcome. This is the third part of a three-part tutorial series on modeling characters using subdivision surfaces and different forms of 3D modeling in Rhino 3D. This part will cover creating a photorealistic rendering and using lighting effects from an HDRI image that we took from the stock image photos available to subscribers of Creative Cloud, but there's other options out there for you too if you don't have Creative Cloud. So without further ado, let's get to how to create a cool rendering. All right, so the second part is about trying to get this thing rendered. So we're going to add materials, background, create some interesting shapes and forms with the background scene HDRI, and deal with some camera lens lengths, all kinds of really fun and interesting tools for getting a good rendering that's going to look really nice. So let's go ahead and get started with the rendering process now that we've got it modeled. So for materials, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my materials tab here, or type the word materials, or make sure that you've got show panels, materials selected there. Add material, right click, create new, and I'm going to use plastic. And then I'm going to change the color of this to kind of like an orangish, brownish kind of color. Mess with saturation, lightness, probably right about there. And I'm going to apply it to this, to the face, to this part of the tail. Create another new one. And I'm going to do more plastic. This one, I'm going to do the kind of tan color. It's almost like an off-white, right about there. And I'll apply that to, well, let me just go back to my layers here. Actually, if I do assign to layers of objects, it'll assign it to anything on the same layer. Nice, quick, easy. All right. Click on this object, another new one. And this one's going to be black. Actually, I'm going to make it like a brownish kind of color like that. And assign to layers of objects. Cool. Let's make another one. Or should I just do the same color? No, it's a little darker. Let's do it. Create new. And the eyes, I'm going to do like kind of a black color. And assign to layers of objects. All right. The nose, I'm actually going to do the same one. And the mouth, I'm going to do the same black. All right, so we can also play with how reflective some of this stuff is. I can turn down and make it more matte. So maybe like the ears, I might want less reflective. But everything else I'll be fine with. Maybe the eyes, a little less reflective on the eyes. So that changes how matte or gloss parts are. No, leave that like that. Okay, now that we have our basic materials on, we can go ahead and create an environment. Now, this is where things get kind of fun. So right now we just got kind of in the void, right? We can pull up our render settings here. If you don't have this panel, just make sure you click on Show Panels and have Render Settings checked, and it'll be right here. And under render settings, we have a couple of different settings that we want to change here. So right now we've got using the studio as the background for reflections. I want to actually create a 360-degree environment for the object. I also want to create a ground plane. Right now the ground plane is just shadows, but I'm going to add a material. And you can use any of the materials you've already got selected. Like I can use that basic plastic that I'm using for the eyes, or you can add a new material right here. For example, if you wanted to do metal, you can do like a stainless steel or something like that. Kind of cool. Sure. And it's reflective. Note that if your computer is slow or processing 3D objects is difficult for the hardware you're using, the more reflective surfaces, the more difficult it is to render, and the more likely you are to crash. Speaking of, save often, right? So I'll save. Okay, so we got it saved. Now let's talk a little bit more about environment, right? So this is kind of in a basic, kind of boring environment right now. Let's go ahead and switch over to our render tab here. And under render tab, you can see right now we're using a 360-degree environment to create this light reflection that's happening on the object. But we also want to create a 360-degree environment. So if I click on this, you see it says basic environment. I can also click down and add a new custom environment, import from environment library. These are all the ones that come with Rhino, which are great. But you can add more. You can look for HDRIs anywhere. That's the kind of image that this is. But I'm using Adobe stock. So I have a license for this. I can come on here and download any of these HDRIs. I just searched for HDRI on Adobe stock. And the one I'm going to use is this one. So you just click on license to license it and download it to your library, and then download it to your computer. And then find it, put it on your in a folder, like preferably in the same folder as you're keeping your file in, so you don't lose it. And then click on down here, and then under basic environment, you can click on the pencil, and the pencil will then bring up a window. It looks like something like this. If I expand it out, you can see I can click to add a texture. And I'm going to add a bitmap texture, and then I'm going to find that image that I already downloaded. So I'm going to open that image. And this takes a bit of time usually, so just bear with it. Don't click around. This is why we saved, because this is going to actually kind of be a little bit painful for your computer. Using the basic Rhino files are always going to be a little bit quicker, and they're actually going to handle a lot better in the software. So, you know, this is kind of doing more custom stuff, and I've got the processing power to do it. So why not show you how it looks? All right, so once it's working, you have some settings on here I don't recommend messing with unless you really feel like you have to. The ones like repeats are basically making the image repeat itself over and over again on your image. And any of these things are going to be really, really difficult on your computer to kind of process. Offset basically will rotate this around, because it's basically this image is pasted like on a sphere that's wrapping around your object. I think this looks fine for what I'm going to use, so I'm not going to change anything here. So I'm just going to close this, but then I'm also going to take this where it says studio here, and I'm going to go to our basic environment. And so that's going to make all of the reflections on the object relate to the reflections in the background. Great. So this is looking pretty good. We're almost ready to do the actual rendering. So this is not rendered yet. This is still in a just a rendered view here. Rendering, we'll put it in ray traced, which I'm going to do now, but I don't necessarily recommend this for everyone, because if your computer can't handle it, it might crash. So ray traced, cool. So now you can see the reflections a little bit better on Eevee here. And what I'm going to also do now is I'm going to kind of play with the staging of my character here. So I can rotate, you know, kind of try to make it, you know, have like whatever stance or impact you want. You know, think about staging. think about composition, all that kind of stuff. And then once I get it like this, one other thing I might want to do is soften some of the edges. So if I select an object, I go to properties here, there's some options under properties. I can go to edge softening here and turn it on. And what that's going to do is it's going to add a bevel or like a little rounded kind of quality to all of the edges at a 0.1 millimeter effect when it's rendered. Okay, so this object softened at 0.1 looks something like that, but I'm going to actually go with 0.05 here. Give it a minute to compute. So that's edge softening, and that makes things look more real. There's a saying in virtual design that that imperfection is the best form of perfection. So like where these are so sharp that they look unnatural, that might kind of dissuade viewers from thinking they look real. So, you know, you can kind of play with that more. Also, let's talk a little bit about lens length. So if I go to view up here, I can go to set camera, and I can change the camera lens. Basically, where I am in the scene, like if I get really close up to the character here, we say I'm really close, right? But I want to zoom out, like I'm a photographer and I'm really close to the subject, but I put on like a wide angle lens that can change things. So if I go over to view, set camera, go to adjust lens length, then I can zoom out by clicking and dragging. So I'm not actually stepping backwards, if you imagine that. Like you can see now how much more of the background I'm getting in there, right? Okay. So, and you can also see some distortion, which, you know, gives you that kind of anime cartoon character quality to it, right? Which I think is looking kind of cool. All right. So that's lens length. What about focal blur? Maybe I want some focal blur on this. So let's do that next. So under the properties tab again, with nothing selected, these little circles here indicate focal blur. I can turn it on, use this pick point to grab spots that I want to be in focus. So you can see now I made everything a little bit blurrier. If I say I only wanted like just the eye to be in focus, hit enter. You see that? If I want to make more of it in focus, so say like I want over here to the nose, enter. It's going to change the f-stop over here accordingly. So a 30 f-stop gives you that. So now I've got a nice focal point in the head of the character, and the background blurs nicely. Cool. So that looks good. Next, let's talk more about rendering here. So the render settings are also up here too. So you see we're using a rendering engine called Cycles, basically. You can see down here, ray traced cycles, blah, blah, blah. And we can choose the size of our rendering. And I would almost say that this would look better in like portrait view than landscape view. There's a lot of negative space here because of the focal length that we're using. So I would maybe switch this to a portrait view. So you can click on this down here and go to custom. And then I would maybe make this 3000 by 3600. Okay, and you might be able to just leave yours in draft quality. I'm going to probably bump mine up in a minute here. And then if you come up here to the render tools here, you see this is the button to render. This is the render preview button, which I recommend using for the first time. So we hit render preview, and that's going to give us a quicker processed version that's low quality, so you can see compositionally how it looks. Okay, so I found the composition I'm going to go for. You want to bump up on your rendering panel here to good quality. I've got my resolution. I'm going to do a standard 4:3. And once it's done, you click on the little rendering sphere right there. And then the dialog will pop up and it will render those samples. So I've got mine at 500 samples. If it's taking you too long, you can bump it just down to good quality. You can see I'm working with some good hardware here. So it renders out in like 10 seconds for me. So this is kind of the one composition I'm going to save right now. And I'll save it here. You can see I've already done a couple of samples. And then I might change a couple of things. So I'm going to kind of play with the shape of this. So I'm going to go to shaded here. And that way I'm not dealing with all the background and stuff when I'm trying to lay things out. Okay, so in shaded, I'm going to play with my lens length a little bit more and see how I want this to look. I mean, you might even think about like rotating the head some, right? So it's not just looking straight ahead. Oops. All right. I'm liking this composition, I think, even better. Let's go into ray traced and check our reflections and stuff out. Yeah, so I knew that was going to happen. So I've got to adjust my focal blur again because I changed a bunch of different things. So here I'm going to do this, and maybe to right there. And enter. Yeah, cool. So rotating the head, I think, gives it a lot better compositional structure. So you're always like, you're thinking like a photographer now. You're not thinking about like a 3D designer as much. Another thing I might opt to do is change the reflection. There's a little too much reflection, I think, on the plastic here. So I'm going to go back over to my materials here and select this one. And I'm going to lower the reflectivity down. Just a little bit more matte. I'm thinking 60 should be good. Cool. And then I'm going to go ahead and we'll give this one more render here. And this will be my final render, I think. So I can just type render. Wrong aspect ratio. So I'm going to stop my render. Sometimes when you stop the render, it does crash your computer, so save often. And I'm going to go ahead and change the render 4:3. Let's bump it to do a preview again, just so I can see compositionally. Looks good. Okay, let's go ahead and I think I'm going to zoom out a little bit more. So view, camera, lens length, zoom out. And I'm going to toggle back and forth to rendered and then to ray traced. Okay. Yeah, I think that looks better. And then let's do one more preview. Perfect. Let's render it out. All right, so that's the finished product. I think it looks pretty good. Save it to your computer. And we are finished with this. So hopefully you found that informative. And yeah, thank you very much. See you next time.